In the evening, May walked to the shade in the center of the market area and sat for a while. A tall man approached her with quick strides. It was Carter, the chief knight of the border town. Ever since she had turned down his previous invitation, he had not given up but persistently visited her. May followed Carter and saw a shelf with 5 or 6 pink cubes, each about the size of a palm. This was His Highness's recent invention. Now, everyone in the castle uses it for bathing. After washing, one experiences an entirely different and refreshing sensation, leaving a lingering aroma of roses on the skin because perfume was added to it. May picked up a piece and brought it to her nose, inhaling the unmistakable scent of roses. Subconsciously, she glanced at the price. In the capital city, a bottle of perfume the size of a thumb costs 5 gold royals, while this sizable bar of soap is priced at just 25 silver coins. Once again, it was His Royal Highness. Since arriving in the border town, May had heard the name Roland Wimbledon mentioned more than any other. Whether it was Eileen or Carter, whenever they spoke of the town's transformation, his name would inevitably come up. It seemed that His Highness knew everything. Carter was exceptionally thrifty and frugal. He purchased several bars of soap and gifted them to May. As May looked into his earnest eyes, she felt a strange sensation in her heart, as if something had gently scorched it. For a considerable amount of time, she pursed her lips and remained silent, silently watching as Carter neatly wrapped the soap. The Stronghold Theater wanted May to return and perform, considering that the border town's theater was supported by third-rate actors and attended by the common folk. As the star of the western frontier, the bustling city should have been the most suitable stage for her. However, she really wanted to learn more about the border town. At this moment, Carter handed her a beautifully packaged box. It contained a mirror. Carter said, "You look as beautiful tonight as you did on that day on the stage." Returning to her home in the border town, the window displayed a dusky yellow hue. The setting sun's radiant glow seeped through the window, casting a tinge of orange-red on the objects in the room. May arranged the novelty items she had purchased from the market on the table. Besides the 4 bars of soap, there was a bottle of wine. Removing the cork from the bottle, May poured herself a glass. As she raised the glass, a trace of the wine's fragrance wafted into her nose, sweet and rich. May finished the remaining wine in her glass and her vision gradually became blurred. She stumbled towards the desk, opened a piece of paper, and began composing a reply. She wrote a letter to the Stronghold Theater, expressing her gratitude but declining their request. May was not ready to return to the Stronghold Theater at the moment. In her mind, only the image of Carter's smile remained. "Hello, Miss May. May I invite you for a drink?" Roland sat behind his desk, eagerly observing the knight who had come to report on the recent situation of the First Army. Compared to a few months ago, when Carter had a meticulous demeanor, there were now different emotions on his icy face. The sense of calmness had diminished, replaced by a hint of anticipation and impatience. Barav and Roland looked at Carter, and Barav jokingly asked, "Your Highness, do you know this person? Is he a newly recruited knight?" Roland smiled and replied, "I'm not sure. Let me check the list." Roland had heard some rumors about Carter becoming closer to May lately. However, Roland didn't mind such matters. He hoped that Carter could find his significant other. According to the report from the knight, the First Army had currently equipped around 200 rifles, and there was also progress in forming the Second Army. Proper management of firearms was crucial during live shooting exercises. What was taken out had to be accounted for. The same applied to gunpowder, with on-site distribution during training, and veteran soldiers from the First Army were assigned to supervise. After the work report concluded, Carter hesitated for a moment, scratched his head, and asked if it was true that thumb-sized perfumes from the capital city could be sold for 5 gold royals. If that were the case, Carter pondered whether producing perfumes from sugarcane could bring substantial income to the town. The mention of money widened Roland's eyes, and Barav mentioned that the perfumes were highly confidential products from the capital city. Only 1,000 bottles were produced each year, and only a small portion of them are put into the market. Barav believed that Carter's idea was feasible. There are various methods for making perfume, but the simplest one involves crushing flower petals or herbs with unique scents and soaking them in alcohol. This allows the alcohol to dissolve the aromatic oils within the plants. Afterward, the residue is filtered out, and water is added to dilute the mixture for use. Alcohol can be obtained through the fermentation of sugarcane juice. As for the raw materials for the aromatic oils, roses can be used as they are cost-effective and have a high selling potential. Additionally, exporting and selling baijiu and white sugar to the capital city and then offering them at a lower price to the townspeople can improve their livelihoods. Roland held a lavish banquet in the castle to welcome the arrival of the merchants. It was also the first time that baijiu appeared before the guests. Hogarth took a sip and felt the fiery taste of the baijiu, far surpassing the blandness of beer and wine. Roland had simply produced some as an experiment. During an era when brewing was still the mainstream, distilled liquor clearly stood out as a highly promising product. Spirits like future hard liquor, rum, whiskey, and vodka, all high in alcohol content, emerged from the process of distillation. Along with these distilled spirits, a range of cocktail cultures also developed. However, for the border town, it was still too early to delve into this industry. Margaret showed great interest in the perfume business. In response to the instructions she had given in the previous letter, she had already dispatched people to gather a wealth of information. After the church took control of the internal Winter Kingdom, not much happened. However, the resistance in the Wolfheart Kingdom was much stronger. The church's forces were concentrated at the Broken Tooth Fortress, and they hadn't made any progress for 2 months. King from the Dawnlight Kingdom sent a messenger to Greycastle, believing that the church's intention was to take over all the kingdoms. He hoped that the two nations could form an alliance, expel the church's influence, and jointly confront the Holy City. Margaret said Timothy rejected the proposal. Hogarth waved his hand and said Timothy led the army to the eastern frontier. It is said that a massive fleet has already landed in the Seabreeze County and is plundering extensively in the eastern frontier. The eastern frontier has already seen a large influx of refugees. According to their intel, these plunderers not only rob people of their wealth but also show no mercy towards human lives. They burn down whatever they cannot take away. Margaret asked if Roland had any interest in these people. Roland realized that this was a great opportunity to expand the population. As long as people were willing to settle in the border town, they would be provided with food, housing, and even paid for their work. He inquired about the total number of people. Another merchant replied that most of the strong and healthy men had been taken in by nobles and merchants. The remaining approximately 10,000 people had gathered outside the capital city, with a higher proportion of young children and women among them. Roland made preparations to send Tassa to scout and find a route, while Margaret would provide ships. The two reached an agreement. 4 days later, the merchant fleet set sail, raising their sails and leaving the dock. Tassa, Margaret, and 100 soldiers from the First Army embarked on the journey to the capital city. On the ship, the two of them had a conversation. Tassa was born in the capital city and used to work as a palace guard. Margaret asked how it felt to return to his old home. Tassa chuckled bitterly, saying that if it weren't for His Highness's arrangement, he would prefer to stay in the border town. While the capital city was prosperous, it also felt oppressive. Margaret leaned closer and asked Tassa how he saw Prince Roland. Margaret believed that Roland was an extraordinary person. Despite his poor reputation in the capital city, he was entirely different in the border town. If his inventions were the only reason, then why were these trained soldiers so remarkable? As they looked at the soldiers nearby, some were polishing their weapons and others were patrolling. Compared to the hired guards of her merchant convoy, who would rush to the cabins for entertainment and sleep, it was a stark contrast. Tassa shrugged helplessly. It's not that he wanted to conceal anything, but he genuinely didn't know. Since the fourth prince arrived in the border town, he had become completely different from before. Perhaps Prince Roland had been disguising himself all along. Soon, the merchant ship caught sight of the city walls of the capital. As the city walls came into clear view for Tassa, so did the sight of the refugees. A large number of civilians had gathered outside the outskirts of the capital city, setting up makeshift shelters along the city walls. White smoke rose from the fire pits in front of the shelters, seemingly boiling wheat porridge. However, the relief food in the capital city wouldn't last indefinitely. Once the nobles selected suitable laborers, they would send soldiers to drive these people away. After arriving at the dock, Tassa instructed the soldiers of the First Army to wait for further instructions in the outskirts, avoiding the patrols of the capital city as much as possible. Meanwhile, he accompanied the merchant convoy into the city. Passing through the city gates, he noticed that the guards were conducting much stricter inspections, evidently trying to prevent the eastern refugees from infiltrating the city. As they entered the city, the first thing that caught Tassa's eye was a row of towering gallows with 2 women bound and hanging from them. Timothy was aggressively hunting witches in the city. These women were unfortunate ones who had been captured. During the 6 months in the border town, Tassa had come to realize that witches were not as unforgivable as the church propaganda depicted them. Besides their peculiar and rare abilities, they were no different from ordinary people. Seeing the action of Timothy and the people from the capital made him sick to his stomach. The next day, Maisie also arrived, marking her temporary departure from the border town. As per the agreement made with Ash, she would travel to the slumbering isle and deliver news regarding the border town. Roland took special care to write a lengthy letter for Maisie, expressing not only their spirit of mutual assistance and cooperation but also requesting that Tilly could send some auxiliary witches to assist him. The farewell took place in the castle's backyard, where all the witches had gathered. Each person presented Maisie with a small gift, which delighted her. Before leaving, Lightning asked what Maisie would do if Tilly refused to let her come back. Maisie thought for a moment and then replied that she would secretly fly back. In Roland's heart, he gave Lightning a thumbs up, realizing that within a month, Maisie had been completely won over. Maisie unfurled her majestic wings, clutching her package with her claws. After circling twice, she gradually disappeared into the southeast. Lily carefully observed Maisie in the sky and remarked that she seemed to have gained weight. The outer city area of the capital remained largely unchanged, and after crossing 2 streets, the caravan proceeded toward the market district. Tassa and Margaret waved goodbye, and Tassa ventured alone into a narrow alley. On the table lay a token, a skeletal finger, which may sound frightening, but it was just one among many rats in the dark alleys of the capital. A burly man introduced their group, including one recent addition who had lost everything due to gambling, his money, his wife, and even his house. Penniless, he had no choice but to join the ranks of the dark streets. Tassa had come to discuss business and wasted no time. He directly addressed the increasing number of refugees and the decreasing daily rations for relief. If this continued, a revolt would erupt in the capital. The burly man asked what they needed to do, and Tassa replied that they had to spread a message. A lord in the western border town was willing to accept refugees. In 3 days, a fleet would arrive at the dock. Tassa didn't provide any further information but was willing to offer double the original reward. One of the members suggested that he will go along with a young girl from their group since Timothy had ordered the hunting of witches within the city, and any woman venturing outside had to be cautious, as many had been wrongfully killed. Tassa sighed, recalling the gallows he had seen in front of the city gates. He closed his eyes and hoped Prince Roland will soon become the king of Grey Castle. In the vicinity of the capital, inside a tent, there were 2 sisters who were thrilled to be heading towards the western town. They believed that once they reached their destination, everything would improve. Suddenly, the younger sister began coughing, and at first, the older sister assumed it was just because she had eaten too quickly. The younger sister looked at her hand, where dark spots had appeared in her palm. A strange illness had suddenly emerged in the capital city. The first victims were found lying by the roadside, their bodies covered in dark patches, teeth falling out, skin cracking, and blood oozing out, as terrifying as when witches were consumed by demonic forces. However, the deceased were not women, they were male commoners residing in the northern district of the city. Several more bodies with the same symptoms were discovered, and those who had come into contact with the bodies began developing dark spots on their own bodies. No herbs could cure the illness, and even during bloodletting treatments, the blood turned blackish red as if mixed with a large amount of ink. Fear quickly spread among the crowd, and the number of people seeking solace in the church and praying increased, but all efforts were in vain. More and more people exhibited dark spots on their bodies, and even the refugees outside the city began showing the same symptoms. The high priest of the church stepped forward, declaring that everything was caused by witches, who were unleashing the devil's power to infect innocent people. Currently, no treatment methods could withstand the demonic force, and those affected would perish in extreme agony. However, the church would not stand idly by. They claimed to have developed a holy elixir capable of restraining the demonic force. The high priest gave the infected individuals a glimmer of hope, and they gathered every day outside the church, awaiting the distribution of the holy elixir. Although Tassa harbored doubts about the church's claims, he temporarily halted the transportation of refugees just to be on the safe side. After leaving the tavern, he found a shop marked with the emblem of the Margaret caravan and presented his token. It didn't take long for him to meet the female merchant again in the back room of the shop. Tassa took out a neatly folded letter from his pocket. "Please ensure that Margaret delivers this letter to His Highness as soon as possible,"